Now, we'll cut through all the guff of the budget with Holly Hughes later in the show, and there has undoubtedly been a lot of guff. But let's get to the heart of the issue of the budget, and that is, of course, what it has delivered for you. And if you're on welfare, it's delivered you an extra $40 a fortnight. Great. If you're a single parent, it's delivered you extra support so you can spend more time at home with your child, and that's a good thing. It's one of the most sensible measures in this budget, I think. But let's also not forget that it was the Gillard government, in which Anthony Albanese was a minister, that wound the payment back. It was, of course, a Howard-era measure. If you're young or you're old or you're on welfare, there's more incentive for doctors to bulk bill your consultations. And on it goes, with more support for people who already receive support. There wasn't much to be said for Middle Australia, though. Menzies Forgotten People, Howard's Battlers, Tony's Tradies, Morrison's Quiet Australians, whatever you want to call them. People, like many of you at home, who live what you might call a comfortable life, but you don't get much in the way of government benefits or assistance, but you're certainly not, rich by any stretch of the imagination. You send your kids to a decent school, you put food on the table, you've got a mortgaged roof over your head, and you try to go on a nice holiday once a year, or you've got a boat or a car in the shed to tinker with. It's the Australian dream. But as you would all well know, living this Australian dream is getting harder and harder. You might have to forego that holiday this year. The hobby project has gone on the back burner. Instead of treating the family to takeaway once a week, you're now doing it once a fortnight. These are the belt-tightening measures that ordinary Australians have been doing this year, and many more will have to do as the year wears on. On the Reserve Bank's numbers, something like 880,000 mortgages will come off ultra-low fixed rates this year and go on to whatever your bank's standard variable rate is. 880,000 mortgages. That is a huge number. And it means that in the next 6.5 months, there will be many more people and many more families feeling the pinch than there are right now. If you thought the cost of living crisis was bad at the moment, well, we haven't really seen anything yet. By next month, the repayments on my mortgage will have gone up by 47% in 11 months. Now, thankfully, my mortgage is quite modest because it's on a property in Adelaide where I used to live, not in Sydney where I live now. But I tell you what, people in Sydney and Melbourne in particular are feeling that pain acutely, and they will be feeling it even more in the coming months. Someone with a mortgage of $550,000, which was the average loan between 2020 and 2022, will be up for about $900 extra each month when they come off fixed rates. A mortgage of $1 million will cost you more than $1,600 extra each month. Now, for a family earning $100K a year, which is what is deemed to be middle income, that is a lot of extra money to find. And I know $100K is more than a lot of people earn, but if you live in Melbourne or Sydney with a mortgage or rent to account for, you're certainly not living in luxury. So what was in the budget for these people in Middle Australia? 4/5 of bugger all. Now, I suspect it will be a different situation in next year's budget. Labor needs Middle Australia if it wants to retain government at the next election. But by the time the next budget comes around, many people will have already hit that stark mortgage cliff as they come off fixed rates and then feel the pain. And despite the government more or less indicating that they won't touch stage 3 tax cuts, they'd have to be brain dead to do so, middle income earners will still be worse off in terms of how much tax the government takes away from them. Now, just as a reminder, the stage 3 tax cuts mean that from July 1 next year, the tax rates of 32.5% on income between 45K and 120K, 37% on income between 120K and 180K, and then 45% from 180K onwards will be abolished. They'll be replaced with 30% right the way from 45K through to 200K, and then 45% thereafter. With those changes, 94% of taxpayers will pay 30% or less in tax. It's designed to address bracket creep, where your income goes up commensurate with inflation, so you're not actually earning more money in real terms, But your increased pay tips you into the next tax bracket, which means the government clips the ticket on the way through, and despite your pay rise, you actually end up with less real cash in your hand. But even with these stage 3 tax cuts, the Australian National University has calculated that middle income earners will still be $172 worse off in 2025 than they were in 2019. This analysis by Professor Ben Phillips from the ANU's Centre for Social Research and Methods took into account stage 3 tax cuts as well as other measures announced in this week's budget, including increases in childcare subsidies. He found that with all these measures, middle-income households should, on paper, be $1,243 better off next financial year, but that the magnitude of bracket creep is now so large that even with stage 3 tax cuts, it essentially wipes out that benefit. His analysis also found that the average tax paid by an Australian this year would be a record of $16,880, even discounting for inflation because of low unemployment and rampant bracket creep. Professor Phillips said the $250 billion we were told stage 3 tax cuts would cost over a decade was, quote, very much overblown. He said, quote, it doesn't take into account bracket creep, and it's a bit selective to just look at stage 3 because it doesn't take into account stage 1 and 2. In real terms, Professor Phillips says the tax cut will cost us $6 billion a year, far less than projected, because bracket creep has moved so fast. And despite the abundant evidence that ordinary Australians are paying more tax at the same time as their bills and expenses skyrocket, the Greens are still spinning stage 3 as a tax cut for quote-unquote millionaires and politicians. Now, yes, naturally, millionaires and politicians will also benefit from tax cuts, but it's also a tax cut for everyone earning $45,000 or more. The real issue is not that people are getting too much of a tax cut, it's that they're not getting enough. The government's tax take keeps increasing, and many of you will still end up going backwards. That is the real story of this budget. People who are doing their best to get by and support their families are being dudded with higher taxes. They're trying to make it look like they're putting more money in your hand without actually putting more money in your hand. There is no other way to spin it.